I speak specifically of the time you now live. For upon thy things that have taken place in the recent days gone by. But I say, set this down upon thy calendar. For the year that lies ahead of thee will bring many sorrows in the earth. Many things will be multiplied many times over. For I say to thee, my people, the human race has absolutely turned their ways and their minds and their hearts away from me, the true and living God. They are beginning to contemplate of what they can do and achieve. For I say to you, my people, I have hid myself for a period of time, but the hour will be when I will reveal myself in many ways. Thou wilt see the elements of nature begin to express itself, for I am the God of all creation. And I say unto thee, all these things will be subject to me, saith the Lord.
I normally would.
Hey, it's good to see you. And I want to say, I'm thankful to be a part of a family like this. I really am. It's a blessing to be able to look you in the face and say, there sits my brother or my sister. And I know that the things that we've stood for through the years is now reaching around the world. I don't want nobody to think I'm the smartest educated man that ever lived. I'm not. But I learned a few things, brothers and sisters, about what we go to school to learn and such. There's no such a thing as a topic that has confused thoughts, one pitted against the other. Whether it's a poem, whether it's literature, what? When you start reading, it isn't long you get a thought. And when you read down through that literature, you cannot help but realize the writer had a certain point that he was trying to express. And I want to say this morning. We're preaching this because there's a lot of people in Israel that are being hooked on nowadays. Universities, I don't know why. But I want them to know we are not a Gentile congregation that is anti-Jewish, anti-prophetic, or anti the oneness of God. I got a letter here a few weeks back, just a short email, kind of condemning me for listening to follow this little old 4-year-old hillbilly out of the hills of Kentucky. And you know who they had in mind. And I thought to myself, whoever this is, this little old uneducated man out of the hills of Kentucky knew more in 10 years of his life and all these others ever knew in a whole year of life if they lived to be 100 years old. But he condemned me for believing in the oneness of God. And he goes about to take the book of Genesis and starts out with where God said, let us. Now, I'm not going to make this one of them long messages that covers over 3 or 4 services. I want to try to make it today and tonight. I want to condense the old and the new and try to show and prove to people there's only one God that ever was but one. He's been debated, he's been discussed, he's been written about by pagans, heathens of every description. I know I saw a picture one time in India where they pictured the God of heaven. He had 3 heads. Well, the God I serve don't have 3 heads. And I want to say this morning, if you will turn with me, I want to try to make it simple and yet very self-explanatory. I do want to say this morning, as we do go to Genesis, the 1st chapter, true Christianity got off course as we begin to leave the first century of Christendom and come into the second. By the time we come then into the third century, brothers and sisters, the Trinity is on its way into the framework of what Gentile Christianity is going to believe. When we go back then into the little Gospels of John, it proves there by the way John wrote certain things into those little epistles. The Godhead was fast being attacked by all kinds of teachers there in the closing days of the first age of Christendom. And I will say this morning. As God seeks to put his bride together throughout the world, called out of all the religious systems, organizations there is of Christendom, the little bride of Jesus Christ will wind up believing in the one God that the Jewish apostles taught when the gospel era started. Now, it's hard for me as a Gentile to think as a Jew would think it. But we've got to realize the whole book that we hold and adhere to as being the infallible Word of God. When we're talking about God himself, the being that is God, it does not give you a half a dozen different pictures leading in different directions. There's only one. Here in Genesis 1, the Trinitarians like to use this particular phrase. And the time has come now. He's going to create a man. And God said, let us. I grant you the word us is a plural word. But at the same time, I want you to know, God is not talking about three persons in the Godhead. Because look at the next expression. Let us, now whoever the us is, we will get that in a minute, make man in our image. Now that is another plural word. And after our likeness. Now if God here is speaking of the three persons in the Godhead, then I would be looking at you this morning as a bunch of jumbled up pieces. Because when I look at you, I only see one person. I don't see three persons. So if we are made in the our likeness, of whatever is a plural, we've got to understand, was that a plural of persons? But a plural of what? Now think of it seriously. I'm not an educated man, but common sense would tell me if I'm going to express something other than I'm going to make something other, let's just say, I designed a house. But I realize this. Me as a person, I'm not going to build the house all by myself. I'm going to incorporate helpers. And that's exactly what God is talking about here, helpers. Now, it's essential that we understand what these angelic beings are all down through time. We don't preach angels as being objects of worship. But as you study the Bible and read it all the way through, from the beginning to the end, angelic beings are on the scene. Wherever God is moving on the scene for the benefit of the human race, angelic beings are right there also. Because God has seen fit to share himself with something. So I'm saying this morning, it's utterly impossible for the word us to imply or to bring out that there's three persons of the Godhead, and that they say they're one. Because when we go to the next plural, ire, that is also a plural word. Well, if the Godhead is a plural, and it's a plural persons, then man would have had to have been made in the plurality of persons also. But then we have to realize, when God did make man, He created man in His own image and after His own likeness. So what's the point in saying us to start with? It just goes to show God is going to use angelic beings as helpers in this whole process of time. Keep in mind, the Bible was not written the first day that Adam was in the garden. It was not even written before the flood. It is true, I've read the histories. In certain places in Babylon, ancient writings have been found that are supposed to be traditional thoughts copied, handed down through time. Some of it goes along with what the Bible would say, but a lot of the rest of it is tradition. It brings in about the flood and everything. But my main point is this morning, to start out this way. When God said, let us, He's speaking to His angelic beings, plural. And when He said, let us make them after our image and likeness, then I have to say, brothers and sisters, we're not looking at three persons in the Godhead, and we're not looking at three persons in the multiplication of man. He's only one. It's true there's three distinct parts of man, but that goes into another subject. But let's keep this word us and keep it where it needs to be. So God created man in His singular, personal image of God created He him, male and female. Created He them. So the act, absolutely, brothers and sisters, is a creative act of God Himself. Because if He's God, then He has to have the power to create or to beget something. And I'm saying this morning, at this particular time, God is not a person. Trinitarians have made God a person. And I say this morning, God is not a person. Because when you take the word person and put it into the dictionary, it always brings out or describes something that has a form or shape. But God don't even live and exist in that likeness. He's a being. And when you say a being, you're describing something that's invisible, that does not have a shape, and He don't just dwell at one certain point. He's everywhere. He fills the universe. So being a being that way, He's invisible, never has been seen. Though down through the Old Testament times, God spoke into the prophets in different ways. In different ways. We will come to that later. But as we start this subject this morning, let's settle it once and for all. Us is not God talking about the plurality of gods or persons in the Godhead. It's God talking to His angelic beings. And when we follow this straight through the Old Testament, wherever God moved, spoke, or dealt with a human race, angelic beings was always there. What was they there for? It just goes to show God wants to share Himself with something other that's lesser than He is. But it's a part of His creation. Let's go to this word us again. Let's go into Genesis 3. Adam and Eve now have eaten of the forbidden fruit. God has now provided them a covering. And we're in the 22nd verse of the 3rd chapter. And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us. And again, he's not referring to the Godhead as persons. He's referring to the Godhead and to the plurality of these who he's talking with, of the knowledge they possess, having seen what Adam and Eve have done. Behold, the man is become as one of us. Again, this does not involve shape or form or nothing. It points to the mentality that the man is conscious of now, and that the angels are conscious of, and the angels are conscious of what the man has done. As one of us. To know good and evil. So good and evil absolutely is not an attitude of the tip of the fingers. It's an attitude of what's in the mentality. That's the way we have to look at it. So therefore, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. And just a few comments along that line. Brothers and sisters, in our natural mind, we like to look at this, that when God has said this, as he drove them from the Garden of Eden, to do what? To till the ground. Don't never think, brothers and sisters, that this place called the Garden of Eden was a place that had a wrought iron fence around it. It didn't. It was a geographical spot described in the first and second chapters of Genesis. Lies between the Nile and the Euphrates and the Tigris. That's the east and the west extremities of it. And I would say this morning, when God did drive them from this garden, he did not drive them from a geographical spot on earth at all. God drove them from the paradise, that little bit of heaven that he placed over that geographical spot, to start the beginning of the man. But since man now has done this, God's going to drive him out of the presence of this paradise, this heaven, where he can no longer remember it nor describe it. And as he does, he will no longer see two trees. I've been asked this question. Well, Brother Jackson, you say that the two trees is a symbol of two laws. That's well and true. They're only symbols. But then when we come to Revelation chapter 2, did he not say to the first church age, to him that overcometh will I grant to eat of the tree of life which is in the midst of the paradise of my God? Is he pointing to the spot between the Nile and the Euphrates? No. He's talking about that little bit of paradise that God has lifted. So we can say this morning, when God drove them out, actually he lifted the spiritual realm so that they could never see it and understand it, nor even describe it. So it became a lost element to the human race. So we can say this morning, as man that was left, where? Right in the same spot. To do what? To till the ground. So I say this morning, Adam and Eve did not take one step in either direction. So now, let's keep that in mind. And he set angel at the east with a flaming sword. Naturally, brothers and sisters, they could no doubt see the angel because they had existed in that realm once. And so therefore, brothers and sisters, God wanted them to know they've done crossed the marginal line, and no more again can they come back into his presence and enjoy the presence of God as they had done before. But now let us keep on going, brothers and sisters. When we go on down through time and the human race begins to multiply, sin enters the picture. And right where paradise used to be, that's where sin originated. That's where crime originated. That's where all the evil before the flood began to show itself. Then God sent the flood. Now turn with me this morning. Let's see how this word us comes into the picture again. We're in Genesis chapter 11. The flood is now over. They've landed now in a place, and the place where they landed is in the plains of Shinar. You know where that's at? That's in the level plain country of Iran. And brothers and sisters, as this terrible earthquake hit, it hit in the midst of an ancient city that goes way back to that period of time when the human race began to multiply. I saw this morning, they told how many thousands of years old the ruins of this place was. And it's made out of nothing but what we would call adobe type brick. It's just mud and clay put together and baked. That's why it didn't take a big 7 point something another earthquake to destroy it. It was only a 6.5. But they showed the other night also the ruins of an ancient, I don't know whether it's a castle or what, showed how it was built. And I thought to myself when I saw that all goes back to the time when the human race in the plains of Shinar, they begin to cultivate, they begin to plan their future, they begin to multiply. Their language was all the same. And as they begin to multiply, then we will say the leaders got together. You know what? I think it's time that we start building a memorial for ourselves that will reach to heaven. To think that man in his intellect would have a knowledge to want to do such a thing. And brothers and sisters, they did not have limestone rock to build it. They took absolutely nothing but dirt and water and made adobe brick, and they started building a tower. And in some of the ancient geography books I've got, they show mounds of this huge dirt. They say this is the area where the tower began to crumble away through centuries of time. But they say deep inside of this you can still find the stone, or not the stone, but the brick that was compiled into this thing of building a tower to heaven. Now, brothers and sisters, they all spoke one language. And they were going to absolutely achieve something or other. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, God did not curse this thing 6 months after they started. He waited till that thing got way up there in the sky. And I like to think of, brothers and sisters, that at the base of this covered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square feet of surface. And it gradually, we will say, tapers. So there had to be an inroad, gradually crawls around this thing. And I have no doubt, brothers and sisters, that for weeks and months, maybe a few short years, this project succeeded. But now let us see how God looked upon it. And I have to say, we are still serving the same God, and He looks upon a lot of this modern mental, intellectual achievement that man has reached today like He's going to make this world a better place to live in. No man on earth now is going to make this planet a better place to live in. He's not. God's going to rip and tear this thing to pieces one of these days. And it won't take Him 15 years to do it. Now let's see what God says. And the Lord appeared unto Abram. I'm ahead of myself. Getting back to the chapter 11. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. That's in the southern plain areas of Iran, the country today. And they said one to another, the word go to means get ready, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. Now, brothers and sisters, where did they learn this building technique? It had to come from before the flood. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, get ready, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And brothers and sisters, we have agnostics and critics today that wants to condemn the record of the Bible. But there is ancient geographical discoveries and diggings that proves that this ancient tower and what was built back around it in that ancient time is there today if they dig for it. So to me, that's proof that at that time, God was looking upon what man was doing. And the Lord said, and the Lord came down to see the city. Now, brothers and sisters, he was not a man or a person sitting somewhere on a chair up there in heaven and got up and come down a long flight of stairs. You know that. This is a figure of speech that God absolutely showed his presence. Because after all, if God is everywhere, then he was there that much. But we can say, here's where he puts his intelligence. Here's where he puts his whole attitude and outlook about this whole thing. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. So there was the remnants of a city in the base areas, which the children of men built. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And now I want to say at this time, there is in the political minds of world leaders today, we are going to fight terrorism everywhere. I have nothing against how they want to fight terrorism. They ought to start 50 years ago. They ought not have let it got this big a hold. But now they wake up. And when you look at the spirit of terrorism, what's the basis of it? It's that ancient Muslim religion. Every bit of it comes right out of the Middle East. Right out of the land that the Bible absolutely gets its cradle from. We hear the news. Indonesia, the Philippines, Pakistan, India. This spirit of Islam, terrorism, is going around the world. And there's a philosophy and a motive in it, brothers and sisters. Wherever these groups of Al-Qaeda and all of that, they have every one thing in mind to eventually get into every government, every concept of the human race, and bring it to an end and establish this Muslim religion as a dominant. Because, brothers and sisters, I've read enough about it. When it started, all through the Middle East, right in the very country that it started, by Muhammad. Someone tell me then how did it get where it absolutely covers practically all of North Africa, all of the Middle East, plumb from there, plumb up through Syria, Turkey. Then you take it on east. Wherever it goes, it has always worked through the means of terrorism. They will try to tell you that, oh, but there's a lot of peace-loving Muslims. I don't give a dime if there is. But yet you let the Muslim terrorists rise up, brothers and sisters, and then let us see who these peace-loving Muslims follow after. That's the point. I say that not out of disrespect. If our modern philosophy today, oh, but you're talking about hate religion, and I say right back to them, and you're talking about hate religion because you have condemned us Christians. You've shut our mouths. You won't let us speak in the high places, but yet you will turn right around and let these other devilish things come right in and undermine it. And I say in return, you're going to pay the bill one of these days. Yes, you are. Because the Bible tells me there's only one name given among men whereby we must be saved. Then that is Jesus Christ, who God ordained to be the Savior of the world. So we come on down here to see what happened at this tower. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one. And they have all one language. And that's a whole lot like this United Nations thing. After 50-some years of this miserable, crooked, rotten thing, brothers and sisters. Its headquarters is in New York. And we've got preachers today around the world saying that UN is the beast. I have to say, brothers and sisters, these poor preachers today, brothers and sisters, don't even know what side of the bed they was born on. Now that's a figure of speech. Because, brothers and sisters, the beast that I have in the book of Revelation is a beast. It's a remnant of the old Roman Empire. Because Daniel saw in that 7th chapter that last beast would be the remnant of the old Roman Empire. And when it speaks of it in Revelation 17, it speaks how that it's renewed, and the spirit of it comes right out of the bottomless pit, which is hell itself. So the spirit that used to live in it, when the head was wounded, then it left. And for a period of time, brothers and sisters, we can say the beast was no longer active. But in the Bible, it plainly says that deadly wound was healed. And when it was healed, and the whole world wondered after the beast. So I'm saying this morning, and I'm not preaching on about the beast, but I will say this. One of these days we're going to see something take place against this United Nations. It's been a decoy. It's been a counterfeit. And it has thrown a lot of society off balance. And I have to say this morning, from the Korean War to the Vietnam War, to all of the other small wars fought throughout the world, what nation was it that sent their young men to die on the fields of battle? America. How come America has to foot the bill for the whole rotten stinking mess? That's not right. But let's leave that as it is. All right, so God is coming down to take a look. He says, sin. They have one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing. God's seen it. That nothing will restrain them, which they have imagined to do. And I'll have to say this morning, if God was to let this stinking UN carry out all of its political philosophies and ideas, the day will come, brothers and sisters, you no longer can absolutely salute the American flag. You'll be saluting a flag that only absolutely commemorates UN. That's the end of the whole picture. Because we will be a nation subject to another system of a government. And I'll have to say, God have mercy. And I'll have to say, brothers and sisters, I'm thankful to have been born in America. And I don't want my thoughts to get off course. But I've seen some of our boys in Baghdad this morning. And showed some of these young Baghdad children standing among some of these American soldiers. And one American soldier had a little Baghdad child in his arms. When I saw that, I couldn't help but think, I remembered that myself back in World War II. The Japs came into into the Philippines. You've heard of the Death March. They butchered the Filipino people, tortured them, worked them to death. I remember when we went in there, there was a little 8-year-old boy, Filipino boy. He always liked to get around us. But he looked like he had a hair lip. You know how you'll see somebody like that. But it not only went from here, it went from down in here to this part. We asked him how he got that. A Jap soldier hit him in the mouth with the butt of his rifle. And I thought to myself, through the news bulletins, I have followed these wars. The American soldier has fought and died on the beaches to give other people freedom. And when he went in and freed the villages and the towns and the cities, it wouldn't be long till the little children is following him for handouts, candy, and things that he would have in his rations. Because there has been that spirit of that American man I thought to myself, why are we the ones that have to do all of this? Why don't some of these other stingy, selfish, political idiots? Well, excuse me. And God said, 7th verse, go to, get ready. Let us go down. Now, who is the word us? It's not God in three persons. He's speaking in conjunction with some other beings. And I have to say, he's speaking concerning his angelic family. So I have to say, brothers and sisters, when God that day said to the angelic beings who was looking on, he says, get ready. Let us go down. So it was the power of God, as he has authorized these angelic beings and instructed them and gave them the intelligence as to what to do, each one in their part. And I have to say, when God set that angelic family loose, that night, brothers and sisters, I see angelic beings coming into households. And he began to absolutely cause the family to have a different dialect and a mental understanding of it. Now, he never pit a husband and a wife nor children against. But you've heard me say many times, as these angels went in their separate ways, each one knew exactly, precisely what to do and to what area it was to affect. And I have to say, when them angels have walked through this area of this pre-Advent of Christ era, when sun rose the next morning, the angels had done their work. And God was behind it, if you can understand my point. Now, some people will say, well, you're telling me that God needs help. No, God don't need help. But the God I serve is a God that likes to share himself with something of his creation. He don't need a man to tell a sinner what to do. He can do it himself. But God ordained that the gospel be preached by man. But that is the responsibility of man to know what he's saying and why he says it. Because it's how he's been inspired by something that causes him to say the right thing and give the right picture in the minds of the hearers. So God has said, let us go down, and there confound their language. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, when the sun rose the next morning, the husband could say to the wife, good morning. In all probability, he was speaking in another dialect he knew nothing about, but it was natural to him. But as she fixed his breakfast and everything, and he was getting ready to go out to make his way toward this great big monster of a tower, he began to meet the friends in the roads. And brother, there's where chaos began to break out. And the more of his old friends, he remembered their faces. But when he would say something, his friend would look at him like he was making fun of him. The point of it was, God has confounded their dialect because he's going to bring this thing to an end. Well, nevertheless, I heard a preacher say one time, they all gradually pushed and made their way to their positions on this tower. And finally, when the last man up there, he got in his position, he said, pass me a stick. And the guy below him thought, he wants me to hit him with a brick. And the whole thing started. And before the sun set that day, chaos has broken out on the tower, and there was not another brick laid. God brought the thing to an end. So, brothers and sisters, I'm saying this morning, irregardless whether it fits a Trinitarian doctrine of divinity or not, the word us here in Genesis is not God talking about three persons in the Godhead. He never was described as that. He is a being. He's a spirit. He's supernatural. He's invisible. But yet he's all power. He's all intelligence. He's everywhere. Time, God didn't just start. God always was. Time is something that starts. But God's the author of that also. So now let us take this, brothers and sisters, and run it all through the Old Testament. Because I want to say this morning, there was no Bible written before the flood. The human race began to multiply. Then he scatters them. Then after a while, brothers and sisters, as the different races begin to be scattered according to their dialects, God looked down one day and he saw a certain man by the name of Abram. And we picked that up in the 12th chapter. I want to say it this morning. It doesn't describe to you by what means did God speak to Abram. But I have to say, brothers and sisters, whatever means, whatever kind of a manifestation God chose or ordained to speak to Abram, I will say this morning, whether it was an audible voice, whether he said an angelic being, or what, Abram knew good and well that it was God that spoke. Because, let's read it here. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. Well, he was born and raised up on the other side of the Tigris, in the land of Ur. So the city of Ur then was a predominant metropolitan city of his day. So Abraham grew up in that area. Now Abraham did not live in the city of Ur. He lived in the vicinity of Ur. Because then when he did succeed in leaving the land of his kindred, he was a man of wealth. When you study further on, he owned cattle. He owned all kinds of livestock, sheep and stuff. So, and he had servants, men servants. So the point is, brothers and sisters, God seen in this man called Abram a peculiar likeness of an understanding, and he liked it. Up till this time, we can say that God could speak to any person throughout the whole human race. But as this time has come now, God began to see the point of its necessity. That he began to separate a certain lineage line of people that he could put a revelation in. And I will say it this time. When we begin to deal with the call of Abram and see how God then began to deal with him and lead him through the years that followed as he come on down to the land, we see less and less of God dealing with other nations of people. And we see nothing but how God begins to deal with this man. And I will say this morning, supernaturally God dealt with this man. He saw something in him that was important, that he give him a revelation. And I will say it this time, God instilled in Abraham the true revelation that God is one. He's a being. He's a spirit. He's sovereign. He fills the universe. He don't live in a shape. Yet he's the fountain of all intelligence. Therefore, he's all wisdom. He's all knowledge. And he's everywhere at the same time. He's unlimited in all of these attributes. So God can choose by any means, whether by angelic beings or just speaking in an audible voice. And he begins to deal with Abraham. Now then, as we come along, brothers and sisters, it tells us, later as Abraham has come into the land, God brought him into the land and told him how you're going to give him that land for a covenant and to his seed. When you read the descriptions, brothers and sisters, of this land, and there's no less than about 3 different times that God spoke to Abram, he would give that land and add to his seed as a covenant. Now, at no time in Abraham's life did he succeed in being able to possess from the border to border that whole land. But God keeps reminding him of the importance of this land. And I choose to say this morning, because I heard a man on Fox News this morning as was talking about the Jew. And he was trying to say this morning that Ariel Sharon, if he would do more, we will say, to show less hostility toward the Palestinians than what he does, wanting to fight back, he believed that there could be more peace in the Middle East. Now, when I listened to that, I just thought, yes, and you're an educated idiot. Not a one of you will listen to the Bible. You don't want to look to it. And I have to say this morning, brothers and sisters, I could say this morning and sit without shuddering. It's just like for the last number of years, God had just absolutely folded his arms. Go ahead. Carry out what you want to do. When the Bible says, and God put in their hearts to fulfill his word, you'll find that in the 17th chapter of Revelations. When he takes his hand off of men and begins to let them drift and wander into the realms of their own thinking, then the devil can come in and really begin to plant the thoughts in their minds. And I will say this morning, because this leads up to the fact, one of these days, the natural process of how we see certain things coming about, God's going to change the order of this. The other night, I tried my best to describe that extra 75 days added on to the end of the 1,203 score days. You know, that's nothing but 2.5 months in the old prophetic structure. I want to ask you a question this morning. When you take the earthquake that's just been hitting Iran, then you take the avalanche in California, they're now saying, after all the foliage in the fall was burnt up, there's nothing left there to hold the dirt. And down this one canyon, the destruction and the life it took. Brothers and sisters, when I look ahead to the 6th chapter of Revelation and that 6th seal, immediately after the tribulation, it don't mean 1 week later or 1 week earlier. Immediately, when them days have run their course, shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall withdraw its light, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the sign of the coming of the Son of Man. And I'll have to say, them 75 days start. They can be none other than God's wrath that Jesus is absolutely going to execute by the sword that proceeds out of his hand. Now, out of his mouth is not coming bulldozers, dynamite. It's the word of authority to strike judgment, destruction, and to bring this planet into that era of time as it describes in Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 24. Isaiah 13 says, and in that day the earth shall reel as a drunk man. I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, we'd probably feel like screaming if we was caught in the midst of an earthquake somewhere and hearing all the things falling. But I will say, for the earth to start shaking and reeling like a drunk man, that lets me know down in the bowels of this thing, there's something building up, something tremendous, such a pressure, and when the time is right, God's going to unleash that. And in different places of this earth, brothers and sisters, this planet is absolutely going to feel to people like it's being tossed like a drunk man. Also, Isaiah 24 says, in that day the earth shall be burned, and few men left. That literally means, brothers and sisters, as this thing begins to open up, volcanoes are going to open up and belch out flame, setting nature on fire. Now, it's not going to be a universal fire, brothers and sisters. You've got to read these scriptures in the right perspective. Like I've said before, it is God's wrath. He's displeased with this element of modern mankind. And He's going to execute it and destroy the sinners and cut them out. He'll do it by the elements of nature. But I'll have to say, at the same time, think of the scriptures. Mountains will flee to the sea. Islands will disappear. And I'll say coastlines will disappear. Coastlines will rise. It's God's absolutely. He's creating judgment, getting rid of sinners and their evil stuff, but at the same time, reshaping the planet through all of this to bring it back into another era. Yet we can say in all of this, brothers and sisters, it's not God in three persons. It's God using His angelic family to assist Him, because He's coming with the angels of heaven to execute this. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, He's not coming with chemical factories and all of that stuff to turn loose. All He has to do is just turn the elements of nature loose. And when He does, and I will say this morning, suppose that we was to wake up in the morning and all we heard of is earthquakes hitting different places of the world, cities being demolished. And this whole episode continued on for days and weeks. I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, it won't take God long to bring an end to this thing. And I'll say this morning. God knew precisely what He would do in that day, and why it's worded that way. Blessed and holy is He that cometh to the 1,300 and such number of days. In other words, he that has survived it. He that by grace of God has lived through it. And I will say, brothers and sisters, God is going to get rid of this educated, and here I go again, I'm not against an education. If you're going to go get an education to do something and do it right. But then when they try to tell you, brothers and sisters, but you got to have a college education to know how to clean out an outhouse. Now, see, they don't like for a preacher to say words like that, do they? Well, I like to look them right in the eye. Because you didn't have to go to the Webster Dictionary and know what I'm talking about. But that's the modern philosophy today. You know why they have that? So they can take that little child from you and educate it and brainwash it and make it raise up here and grow up here knowing nothing, only what they program it. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, we have seen America in the last 50 years sell out to the devil, to this spirit of modernism, and now we've got a nation, and the streets are filled with crime and corruption. And each year, and I saw this morning also on the news, now that the new governor they put in California, he's wanted to revamp, rearrange the penalties of sentences and things. And it told the cost of the correctional institutions in California. And I thought to myself, you took God out of America, and God has gave you hell. Because there's no such thing that there is a blank, a void. When you take God out, the devil comes in. And God has proved it by letting America, a nation at one time, we could be proud of our society, our culture. But no, now, we're a nation, they don't even care what kind of a God you serve. And that's why I've said many times, yeah, they like to educate it to the point that we could put a little baby in a rattlesnake in the same crib and wonder why the baby died was a rattlesnake bite. Well, let's go on here. So Abraham, he's been dealt with now, this promised land. And I will say this morning, somewhere in this Middle East turmoil, God is going to turn this whole rotten deal around. We will not always be able to dictate to Israel, you do this, don't do that, you do this, you go there. Because they've got Sharon psychologically programmed to tear up some of these villages that they started building after the 6-day war. And now after 67, here it is 2004, brothers and sisters, and now they're wanting to make them people get out of there. Brothers and sisters, I have to say, Ezekiel plainly said that they would come back into the land in the last day, and they will rebuild the ruined places. And then we come along with our political psychologists and tell them you can't do that. Well, I have to say, God's going to show them one of these days that they can do it. And I realize, yes, at points, it just looks almost like God has just took his hand off of it. But keep in mind, he knows what he's doing, and he knows why he's doing it. And I will say, when God absolutely does put his hand back into it, then you're going to know that God is in the picture now. And you ain't going to have to listen to some Tom, Dick, and Harry talk about it. But nevertheless, let's move on here now. All through this, Abram, being called of God, dealt with. When we come on over here, brothers and sisters, into the 14th chapter, Abram has had a problem. Lot chose the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to live in. He wanted to live in that area. But later there was some kings came in, invaded the land, kidnapped Lot, his families and things, and some of the people of Sodom. We come into this 14th chapter here. So here's this sheep herder from the land of Mesopotamia. He's not even a soldier. But he has 300 men that are servants of his. When he heard that his nephew had been kidnapped by this bunch of ruffian kings, just about like some of them tribal ones over there today, what did Abram do? He got his servants all together. And he said, get your swords out. And sharpen them up real good. And I'll have to say, Abram did not have an atomic bomb, airplane, a weapons carrier, nor a cannon. But he took 300 men, and when he went after them kings, he mopped the ground with them. He killed and he destroyed, because I have to say the power of God anointed Abram and them men. And this was God's way of exalting the name of Abram, and to show forth the picture and the purpose that God has in the man called Abram. So here we have Abram now. The battle is over. He's the victorious ones. He has retaken the treasures and things. And he's coming back home, going towards Sodom. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him. We're in the 17th verse of the 14th chapter. After his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were... Now, the words kings here mean tribal leaders. That's more how we would call it today. That were with him at the valley of Sheba, which is the Kingsdale. Now then, here is where we have Abram coming in contact with an angelic being. I have read, brothers and sisters, after some theologians writing, that this man called Melchizedek was actually a priest king of Jerusalem. They've actually made it that carnal. Now, brothers and sisters, at the time that Abram has come into this land, Jerusalem, an ancient city of the Jebusites, pagan to begin with, nowhere did they worship the true God that Abraham worshipped. But Abram has neared this place, and he is met by this man by the name of Melchizedek of Salem. That's the city's name. And he brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. I have to say this morning, brothers and sisters, this had to be an angelic being that characterized the priest of the Most High God, but he chose that near point near Salem, which is now Jerusalem, because what he characterizes in type is pointing ahead sometime when God will fulfill it in reality. So it's actually an angelic being. It's not an earthly king or priest. How many realize that? That's why, brothers and sisters, even it's in the book of Hebrews, Paul wrote about how that Christ had received the priesthood forever after the order or the type. So it's not based upon the presence of a pagan king or priest. It's based upon the fact an angelic being has come into the scene now. And that's why I have to say, all through the Old Testament, it's God dealing with men by prophets. Then there's specifics where he brings angelic beings into the picture. But I will have to say, at no time, brothers and sisters, does God characterize himself as being three persons in the deityship. He's one. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine. And he was the priest of the Most High God. And blessed. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God. In other words, this is God's way, brothers and sisters, of through an angelic being from heaven that's characterizing something that's one day going to be exemplified in a man, both at Jerusalem as well as heaven itself. So here we find, brothers and sisters, that this angel, he has blessed Abram and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thine hand. And he gave him tithes of all. Abram gave him tithes of all the products and stuff that he had gained. Now he did that, brothers and sisters, when there was no law written. You know that. How many times I've been asked through the years, I've had letters written, Brother Jackson, show me in the Bible where it says we're supposed to pay tithe. Well, it's in the law. But here we see tithe, brothers and sisters, mentioned, and was typed by Abraham long before the law was even given. And it goes to show, Abraham chose to do it out of his own choice. So he must have been inspired by something or other. And here it is set. So he gave him tithes of all. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoelashes, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. So Abraham did not want anything material-wise be given to him, only his relatives back, people. Now then, when we leave this picture, brothers and sisters, we come on down to Genesis, the 18th chapter. I might make this remark. Melchizedek was the beginning of angelic beings that carry a type pointing to the day when God will become manifested in the person of his Son. And in the person of that Son, what Melchizedek typed and fulfilled in that manner, it's to be fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Because it was absolutely at Jerusalem, Jesus, the Son of God, who possessed the fullness of God by his Spirit in all of its divine attributes expressed and lived in him. He gave his life at Jerusalem on a cross as a sacrifice. Then he ascended from Jerusalem to become the high priest of God of the new covenant that is made effective through this sacrifice of his own blood. And brothers and sisters, I realize this. Even your Advent people, they get all fouled up about forever, like the law is forever. Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, forever don't mean eternity. And when we find Paul, he got it in Hebrews, but he goes back to the Psalms. How that Christ has received a priesthood forever after the order or the type of Melchizedek. That don't mean Jesus is going to be a priest forever and ever eternity. We can say this, according to the chronology of the Bible. It lasts for a period of about 2,000 years. Then he will step forth from that priesthood. Then the next office he holds then he will come being absolutely the king of the Most High. So here, where will he rule and reign at? Jerusalem. The city was Salem, but now it's going to be Jerusalem. Same geographical spot. So we can see this angel characterize two biblical characters in that respect. But now then, when we come here, brothers and sisters, in the 18th chapter, the time has come. God has spoke to Abram about he's going to have a son. And what all this son's going to mean to him and everything. And brothers and sisters, we know the problem that's all brought about through Hagar and such like. Now Abram's getting older and Sarah's getting older. But now here we come to the 18th chapter of Genesis. Abram, just a mortal man, sitting in his tent way, in the doorway. And I like to think of it, brothers and sisters, being somewhere just about 11 o'clock. Time to eat a dinner. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre. And he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, high noon. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. Now that don't mean, brothers and sisters, they was right next to him. They stood close enough that he could see it's men, not 3 stumps of trees out there. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself towards the ground. Now there's something about this man by the name of Abram at this time, brothers and sisters. He's had enough of dealings from God through the years. He becomes conscious and aware that when an event like this comes around him, he seems to be prepared to know how to greet it. And said, notice now, my Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort you your hearts. After that you shall pass on, for therefore are you come to your servant. So Abram knew at that time, this is specifically God's way of coming to me for some specific reason at this time. So do as thou hast said. And Abram hastened unto the tent unto Sarah, and said, make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, make bricks, cakes unto the hearth. And Abram ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man, and he hastened to dress it. Now the end result is, a meal was prepared. But we're going to find out, brothers and sisters, one of these objects was not an angelic being. How many realize that? Abram knew good and well, one's my Lord. He addressed him, my Lord. This lets me know, brothers and sisters, there was something about this manifestation. And I will say this morning, as I try to bring this point to a close, God has spoke to Abram enough through his life that there's something about this one particular figure he saw. He knew that is specifically the Lord, because he addresses his communication to him. But the other 2 persons that was with him is not persons of the Godhead. They're angelic beings. So my point is this morning, brothers and sisters, anytime we see a plurality of something, God is always able to distinguish in some way or other that we'll understand. Is it just a theophany? Or is it angelic beings that he is sent to deal and to convey something? And I will say at this time, this one man that characterized the Lord, when Abraham, brothers and sisters, has had the calf fixed and the bread fixed, That lets me know, brothers and sisters, that was pointing to the day coming when God would come down from heaven and manifest himself in and through the person of his Son. And then his Son would walk among the seed of Abram, and they would feed him. As Abram fed him, so did they feed Jesus. How many realize that? But the point is, these other two characters, it just goes to show, angelic beings are always somewhere in the scene wherever you see God manifest himself and demonstrate himself. And it's not three persons of a Godhead. It's God working through his angelic family to convey his will. Now we're going to close right now. I'm going to do my best to finish it up tonight and show you in the New Testament, brothers and sisters. Once these types of the old was characterized and brought about in the fulfillment through the advent of Christ, from then on, brothers and sisters, we've lived in the days of angelic beings, and I'll say this morning. We don't worship angels, but we don't worship a God that's in three persons. He's a God that's one. He always will be one. And I'll have to say, it's up to us to have the right picture. Heavenly Father, take these words today and use them, Lord, I pray now. We're thankful that, God, you have showed light upon our pathway. I thank you for my brothers and sisters, Lord. Help us in these closing days to have an open heart and an open mind. And I pray that, God, we might find grace with you. May you continue to teach us and direct us. Show us the simplicity of your word. In Jesus Christ's name I pray, Lord. Amen.